In the last section, we spoke about the big differences between a persistent volume claim and a persistent volume. Remember, a volume claim is an advertisement. It is saying, hey, all the pods inside this cluster, you can choose from a 500 gigabyte option or a 1 terabyte option. When we write our pod config, we are going to say, hey, this pod needs the 500 gigabyte option. And so you can kind of imagine that our pod config is going to be handed off to Kubernetes with this kind of option tied to it. Kubernetes is going to see that option and it's going to say, oh, okay, I get it. I need to find an actual instance of storage inside of my cluster that meets these requirements. It has to have 500 gigabytes worth of storage. If Kubernetes does not have an instance of storage like that ready to go, then it's going to try to create one on the fly and then attach it to the pod that gets created. Now, I can give you diagrams about this stuff all day and verbal descriptions all day, but to really understand this stuff, you really have to put together a config file on your own. So in this section, we're going to write out a persistent volume claim. And remember, this is going to essentially advertise a possible storage option that can be attached to a pod config. So inside of my code editor, I'm going to find my K8s directory. And inside of here, I'm going to make a new file called database persistent volume claim.yaml. Now, I typed that out rather quickly. Remember that you can always see my file name at the top here inside this tab. All right, so inside of here, we're going to write out a pretty good amount of config. Some of it is going to look very familiar, and some of it is going to be a little bit new. So we'll do the familiar stuff first. I'll say API version is v1. Our kind will be persistent volume claim. We'll do a metadata that has a name of database persistent volume claim, and then we'll add a spec. So the spec is where some interesting things start to come into play. I think you'll agree with me that everything up here looks pretty darn familiar. So for our spec, we're going to give an access modes. Notice how there's an S on there. This is going to be an array, so I'm going to put a dash in like so, and then I'm going to give this a single value. I'll say read, write once. On the next line, I'm going to unindent so that I'm on the same indentation level as access modes. I'll do resources, requests, storage is to GI, like so. Okay, so that's it. That is all the config that we need for our persistent volume claim. Let's take a quick pause right here. When we come back to the next section, we'll talk about exactly what is going on inside the spec section. So quick pause, and I'll see you in just a minute.